Thank you everybody for joining this wonderful presentation. I'm going to go ahead. I have some slides here, but honestly, I might kind of venture off them. I don't really, they're just kind of more talking points. But overall, the agenda is to kind of really talk about penetration testing, what it is, right? And then kind of talk about the different types of penetration testing. And then we're going to kind of go in and highlight the benefits of penetration testing with an authenticated user within the systems, right? Kind of what that's going to yield with the different types of penetration testing. Then we're going to just kind of wrap it up with a demo of a product called Cobalt Strike. And again, the presentation will be as long as it needs to be, and if you have questions, feel free to drop them here. I'm going to kind of open up the chat here. I don't know, Nick, can people drop questions directly into the chat, or do they got to relay them to you?
They'll relay them to me, but I'll be on standby here. So pretty much instantaneous as they come in, I'll relay them to you. And I already have a message to relay to you. Spencer said, "Thanks, Jesse," with 4 exclamation points.
Awesome. So anyway, yeah, again, thank you. And again, this is about the assumed breach model. So let me go ahead and advance this slide ahead here. So we're going to start off with what exactly is a penetration test, right? And this is like $1 million question that we kind of run into a lot, right? The test is, kind of like the bullet point here. It's like a human, right, or a team of humans that are using computer software that's either publicly available, something that they built based off of their own knowledge and research, or just like, somebody interacting with a service looking for, flaws like, hey, did somebody forget to reset the default password on this machine, right? So it's an active engagement by a human operator trying to exploit weaknesses in your computer infrastructure, your IT systems. And also on top of that, part of that could be exploiting that human element, right? Meaning the, hey, socially engineering. My team recently, they've been engaging in different social engineering where they've been going into places under false pretenses like, hey, we work with the power company, or hey, we're with this media production company and you guys signed up to do this with us. And we've been having a lot of success. So again, it's a human element where, you have an active person trying to exploit systems, which is very different from vulnerability scanning. I can't tell you how many times that excuse me, that I've been on a call with a client or people, or just doing one of these webinars where we go, oh yeah, so what do you do for your penetration test? And they go, oh well, we run Qualys, right? Qualys does our penetration test, or Insight VM. Oh yeah, that's doing all our penetration testing. Well, no, it's not, right? Qualys is doing vulnerability scanning for you, and vulnerability scanning is done by computers, right? Computers, what they're doing when they're conducting vulnerability scanning is they're scanning the systems for open ports, different software in there, and then it's matching it up against a known vulnerability database. They're all pretty much using the same vulnerability database, the same vulnerability feeds. Now, sometimes there are certainly some vulnerability engines have maybe published a vulnerability finding before some of the others, but it's pretty much updated and they all kind of pull from the same source. So what it comes down to when you're talking about vulnerability scanning is preference in vendors. And that could be because, hey, well, you just like the way Insight VM works over Qualys, or you like the way Nessus has this one template kind of already pre-configured. So it just kind of comes into, hey, what the end user preference is, right? All right, gonna kind of move on here. So hopefully that's kind of clear. We kind of know what a penetration test is, or we're gonna elaborate more on the different types of penetration testing here in a moment, and we'll kind of dig into that. Okay, so when we're talking about penetration testing, and recently, like, so for me, and I don't know if some people have been kind of thinking this for a while, but for me, like, our customers, right? The majority of times they're like, oh yeah, we'll just put you right in the data center, right? Or we'll put you in the VoIP LAN. And I kind of think back to myself, I'm like, so what conditions could exist that would cause an attacker to kind of be directly in the data center, or kind of be directly in the VoIP VLAN, or kind of be or directly in the camera VLAN. And it all really kind of comes down to how is that customer client laid out, right? So yeah, if like say that VoIP VLAN isn't directly accessible from the outside, in reality, you're not going to be directly jumped into that VLAN where the phone systems are, right? You're not going to be directly jumped into the camera where the camera systems are, and you're also not going to necessarily be able to jump right into the data center. So when I start thinking about testing scenarios, right, and we'll elaborate on this a little bit more with the different types of tests, like the most realistic scenario out there, right, is that one, somebody breaches something on your external perimeter, which could be the web application, right, or some type of device on your external perimeter, like your firewall, like your Fortinet, your Citrix NetScaler, or somebody's going to break in via an email from an end user to an end user where they're going to download some type of software, which is then going to allow the attacker a connection into that end user's PC. And again, we'll go over that a little bit more here in a minute. But when it comes down to it, basic penetration testing, which we offer all these services: web application penetration test, external penetration test, internal penetration test, and again, that other one, which I don't have a bullet point for, is the social engineering engagements, because the end user is kind of usually the weakest link in a lot of these. And a lot of these groups out there that are deploying ransomware are using social engineering techniques to exploit end users. All right, so let's go into the external penetration test, right? And this one is typically unauthenticated, right? So it doesn't really make any sense to do an authenticated penetration test, external penetration test, I'm sorry, on a target like a firewall, right? Because what does that do? So the ultimate goal for an external penetration test would be get as a user on the firewall, right? So if you're going to provide us credentials with that, then the goal of the penetration test is done, right? Now, some might say, oh, well, that's not true. You might want to see where you can get once you get access to that firewall. And I'm like, well, okay, but in a realistic type of scenario, right? Say for example, I'm able to use an unauthenticated remote execution command, right, to gain access to, say, like a Cisco ASA, right? Well, now I could potentially just see, okay, well, can I breach further into that network? Maybe, and see what the most damaging scenario is. Or should I just immediately contact the customer, the client, or whoever and say, hey, just so you know, I was able to do this because of this condition. What you have to do to fix this is apply this patch or update this password or unpublish this listing, right? And that immediately stops the attacker and makes it so that you can't get any further into the network. Now, the flip side of that, right, is potentially that hey, once you have authenticated access, in what else can be seen? But that could be conducted at a completely separate test, and you look for different vulnerabilities there. It's more important just to patch that immediate opening and then proceed with a different type of testing or proceed with an evaluation to make sure that initial foothold is gone, right? So again, with the external penetration test, we're looking at network level services. You're looking at port 22, 80, 443, and again, port 22 is called secure socket shell, SSH. Port 80 is what you shouldn't be running, but it often gets redirected to HTTPS, which is for web server traffic. So HTTP is port 80. Port 443 is HTTPS, which is secure transfer of hypertext transfer protocol, right? And that's the typical thing you see out there. Now, sometimes there's other things like out there, like you might see on a router, you might see BGP, port 179, or you might see any number of different services, right? They're kind of published, but the footprint on externally facing things nowadays is really low. Occasionally you'll see something like remote access port 3389, which is a high value target because it's Windows RDP. But again, it's very rare that you kind of see these things, because a lot of times externally facing, what you're going to be seeing is web servers, right? You're going to be seeing a firewall, or you're going to be seeing something like a Citrix NetScaler or something to that effect. And that's typically it. So typically, what you're looking at is public-facing IP addresses, and we usually have our clients provide us those publicly facing IP addresses, just because that way we're not sitting there digging through DNS records that might not be valid, and we might end up targeting something that necessarily isn't published anymore or isn't owned by that particular client. So it just ends up being for a better test when you actually provide us with the information, so we don't waste time, and we get down to the root of your problems, or it's just an easier check to make sure that your systems are secure. And again, as I'm going through, please feel free to ask any questions. I kind of like the interaction. It makes me feel like I'm just not talking into this camera here. I'm usually used to live people. So all right, so the next type of test that we have is an internal penetration test. And I just noticed I messed up my slides at one point, so I'm going to go off cue here after this and talk about another type of test that we offer. But the internal penetration test, right, is typically what we do, or what we can offer is, and a lot of customers opt for this first option here, an authenticated box is dropped on site, or we go to your site and we sit down with our laptop and we start digging and seeing is what can we find on the network. And normally things like those low-hanging fruit types of vulnerabilities out there, like, oh hey, like somebody didn't reset a username or password correctly, or oh, Microsoft's Eternal Blue exploit is still out there, SMB1 being enabled so we could relay traffic, things like that. But I've often kind of come back to that, hey, is that a realistic scenario, right? Is it just doesn't feel right to me. Is what it comes down to, is like, yeah, you're going to get some results and you're going to like maybe secure some things, but overall, in the realm of possibilities, like somebody's not going to just have unauthenticated access into your network. If they are already there, it's highly likely, right, that they already authenticated in with some other service. So why wouldn't you want your test to replicate that type of scenario, right? Is kind of what it comes down to. So that's why I have that question, and posing that question there is could that really happen? And the answer is no. If somebody's in your network already, right, internally, meaning they have access to your local subnet, it's I'm going to say that they have some credentials into your system already. And that's all there is to it, because they had to have breached some initial vulnerability to get that far anyway. And usually the vulnerability ends up being, unfortunately, a social engineering tactic where they called up and got somebody to reset a username and password, much like that MGM breach that happened, about back in October, I believe it was now, where they were able to deploy ransomware, all because somebody called up and somebody let them in, right? Another type of scenario, which is kind of big nowadays, especially with COVID, right, is the VPN connection to the data center and services, right? So, when COVID happened, we found that all these people had the need to work remotely, right? And then there was all these VPN endpoints published. And now that we're there, the VPN's a big thing, right? Everybody VPNs in to gain access to service. So a realistic scenario is that, hey, somebody falls victim to a phishing email, right? And then those accounts don't have two-factor authentication assigned to them, and somebody's able to log in with VPN credentials that they found either through phishing or through the dark web, or again, a phone call, in that, like, kind of similar to that scenario I described earlier, where they were able to make a phone call, get a username and password, and boom, you've got a VPN connection into the system. So a VPN connection, again, for those of you, I'm assuming everybody knows what VPN is, I hope so. Virtual private network connection gains you access to like data center, company services, and what have you, right? So that's a very realistic scenario that you should test for. Hey, what are my typical end user VPN people that are working from home? If one of them was compromised on their machine, what could that lead to, right? That's a realistic testing scenario. And then finally, that third option that I have here, which is kind of, similar to the VPN connection, but it gives us a little more access, a little more leverage, right? We take a box, right, and we drop it onto a site. And typically, what I like to do is I say, well, drop me or put me where your typical end user sits, right? And give me your typical user domain credentials, right? And because what that's going to do is that's going to allow us to test to the damaging scenario where one of your users is socially engineered or compromised, and then it's going to allow us to see what other vulnerabilities you have that are on your network with an authenticated user, right? So again, in one particular case, a user, we'll say Sally got hacked, right? That's that person. They open up an email, they download a program. Next thing you know, hey, what do they have access to? And that's kind of the scenario we're going after, because that is what's happening out there, right? So let's kind of go ahead and move forward. So again, back to that kind of logic talk, right? So out of the two scenarios here, I think both of these are pretty possible, but based on what I've seen in different research, I feel like there's a lot more of this going on, email that has an attack script versus an external perimeter breach, right? Now, it shifts from quarter to quarter or year to year, but we have seen an uptick in advanced persistent threat groups sending out types of emails, so those emails that contain an Excel file, right? And they're prompted to download that Excel file and go ahead and click enable here. And you know what? People fall for it. And when they're doing all that, what's happening is that that's creating a command and control type scenario where somebody has access to that user system, and then they have control of that user system, their computer, their PC, their laptop, whatever you have. And then they're sitting there, and then they're looking for other vulnerabilities that could lead to further breach of your systems and your networks. Now, let's kind of move on here to the next one. Now, I'm not saying that this external perimeter breach isn't possible. Happens all the time for sure. Like here's two vulnerabilities here, and I'll circle back to the one penetration test I missed because I deleted my slide by accident. Hey, that happens. But either one of those conditions are really probable. Again, I'm saying that the email one is probably more damaging and a lot easier to execute in most places. But if you look at these two vulnerabilities here, right? So the Telerik vulnerability, that's specific to a software that runs on web applications, right? And web applications, when we test those types of applications, it's against a standard called the OWASP Top 10, the Open Web Application Security Project. If you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend you go and test it. And it looks for things like vulnerable software, session management. And usually those types of tests are authenticated, right? Meaning that you're going to have a much better picture of all the different vulnerabilities and all the different pages of your system when you conduct tested using an authenticated account, right? So you want to assume that the bad guy has access in. So once he has access in, he, she, they, what can they do in the system? So especially with web applications, because you just don't know. So a typical user could elevate their privileges to admin, and then in return could elevate and get SQL records or all that SQL records that contains stuff like PII, credit card numbers, et cetera, et cetera. So all those kind of exist during web application testing. And again, I highly recommend, if you're doing any type of web application testing, that it is authenticated, right? Because anything else is kind of just almost a glorified vulnerability scan. If you're just testing the fact that can somebody get into your main login page, I mean, they could try to brute force it or denial of service attack, but they're going to find more if they're able to register for an account and take some actions on that account they use. I'll give a perfect example of that. I was able to create an account on an e-commerce platform that we were testing, right? And during the checkout process, I was able to, using an authenticated user, right, a vulnerability that doesn't exist by doing a vulnerability scan, using an authenticated user, I was then able to add about 20 items to this cart, right? And prior to checkout, sending them to the cart, I was able to input the price as a negative number. So when it hit that cart, I had a negative balance. So I then proceeded to add actual items onto that same cart without adjusting the number. And guess what ended up happening? Well, the price of those products ended up being zero. I could have purchased them and move forward, right? So that's the type of thing you're going to find with an authenticated session. But had I just stopped at that unauthenticated or without any credentials, there's no way I would have found that vulnerability. And in the grand, that's a pretty huge vulnerability. I'm basically stealing product from you at that point. Okay, so enough about that. Again, I kind of missed cue because I missed one of my bullet points. But with the external breach, we've been seeing a lot of, there's those widely known CVEs. CISA has announced like, hey, these are kind of the two major ones that have been going around. Telerik vulnerability, even though it's been reported in 2019, still a lot of web applications that weren't aware, or because they didn't get a full test, or they weren't aware of the type of software they're running, and they weren't aware that a particular upload functionality was available. They were getting dinged with this a lot. And then this most recent one, the Citrix NetScaler, which has been all over the news, basically is allowing people to drop web shells and create backdoors. So those are two great examples in external. I don't know how deep one can get into the whole network, but certainly with this one, you could certainly compromise a web server. And then with this one, you could certainly compromise the Citrix NetScaler, which compromises the network. I don't think it necessarily compromises any servers, but it could lead into other areas depending on, your setup of your organization, right? Okay, moving forward here. So with that other kind of example, with an email attack chain, the user actually ends up being your vulnerability, right? They click on something, and in the background, unbeknownst to them, some other conditions are happening, right? So what happens is, once they click that on, there's a potential for that command and control scenario, right? So the end user will click on that email. Next thing you know, they're calling back out to this command and control server that's out in the cloud, probably hosted in, Russia, somewhere on Azure, somewhere on AWS, because they spin these things up because there's no checks and balances. Anybody can sign up for these services. I have a question coming in for me, so answer only if you wish. From a budgeting perspective, how do organizations justify the cost of assumed breach testing compared to traditional methods? Well, that's a great question, right? Because I always kind of go back to what will it cost you if, say, you are compromised? And I think back to a medical provider, a medical billing provider that I dealt with way back when. Their penetration testing wasn't using any type of assumed breach with an authenticated account. It was just doing, it was almost kind of like a glorified vulnerability scan, right? And another side note, they were hiding things on the side from testers that they weren't really able to find. But testing to the most damaging scenario is going to let you know, hey, what could potentially happen? So when you're trying to justify cost, be like, hey, we have to know what happens if somebody does get in, because in this one particular scenario, the business was down for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, meaning they couldn't operate systems, right? Meaning I would go in there and people were literally in the office, not doing anything, getting paid, and they were playing cards, not cards on the computer, manual like playing cards. So, again, the assumed breach model is going to tell you exactly what will happen if one of your users messes up. So it could be one of those things where, hey, our user messed up, but the attacker was caught by these other systems that we have in place. Good job, we get an A. Or, oh my God, this person got in and they did a mock ransomware and deployed it on all our systems. And now we can assume that we're down for weeks on end because they also got at our backups. So the justification could be like, what if this were to happen and it was the most damaging scenario? How much money would you lose? And then you could identify the flaws in your systems, prevent that from happening. And then once you do that test 1 or 2 times and you're good, you're going to be in a better position for reporting up to wherever you have to report up to, if you're required to report up to certain standards, or if you just want good cybersecurity hygiene. I hope that answers your question. It's kind of a tough one. And it's also kind of tough to go, it's like kind of buying insurance, right? It's always tough to justify the buying of insurance. Another point about insurance, though, is that if you go ahead and you say, hey, we did this type of testing, we have an EDR system, deployed. It'll probably also help you with your cyber liability insurance, which premiums are going up because so many places are getting breached and they're having to pay out. Great, I hope that answers the question or gave you something to think about anyway. All right, so kind of circling back with an email attack chain exploit vulnerability, what we're looking for is basically, so when that person clicks on that email chain, they're going to have permission, the attackers then going to have basic permissions into the organization, but also the permissions that match that user. Now, say if it was an admin user that got compromised, right? You know, it happens. People click on links, even people with a lot of experience, they fall victim to these things just like everybody else. We're human, we're stressed out, we get pulled in a bunch of different directions. You click on an email, click on a link you're not supposed to, download something you're not supposed to. Next thing you know, that attacker is in your organization, basically impersonating you and your permissions, and then they're able to move around laterally or escalate from there if need be. So that's critical to understand that this one user could lead to other areas of compromise depending on how they are set up, depending on how your organization is set up, and you may never know that unless you get this type of testing done, right? Sorry, so let's move on here. So going kind of back to my point, a typical user in a server client ecosystem, they already have access to certain things, right? Do they have access to that file share that contains that HR folder, right? We dealt with a customer one time. They were like, oh, yeah, there's no PII, there's no PII. And then going through, it's like, well, the attacker was in as this user, and this user had access to this HR folder. And unbeknownst to the IT infrastructure team, this HR folder had everybody's information in this one share in PDF format, and they were able to pull ADP records that contained social security numbers on there. So again, I don't know why that was being all stored there. I'm sure they had their reason, but that's really bad. And that was with a standard user access, right? Which should eventually lead to elevation of privileges and things like that, which eventually led to the deployment of ransomware, but we'll be going over that shortly. So depending on the user exploited, you're going to then reveal other levels of exploitation that's possible that wouldn't be possible without an authenticated user. So let's look at some of those vulnerabilities now. So kind of looking at this, right? Some exploited authenticated, and these are from CISA and Qualys, like the top exploited vulnerabilities. If we look here, the Windows Common Log File System Driver Elevation of Privilege vulnerability. Well, that's a pretty new one that is just recently started, again, exploited in the wild, meaning that, hey, if you have an authenticated user, all of a sudden you could use that user to exploit this, and now you have elevated access, like system level access. Print Nightmare, similar type of scenario, takes advantage of a print spooler function. Again, only can be exploited once you have an authenticated user in the system. And then also this one here, this one's maybe a little unfair for me to put in because it's kind of a mix of unauthenticated and authenticated, but more damage can be done when you have an authenticated user in the system. So the proxy cell and the zero login type vulnerabilities end up being pretty damaging when you have like a basic user that you might have gotten their credentials off the dark web or through a phishing attempt. And some other concerns, right? Basically misconfigurations, password stealing, data exfiltration. Again, something that I'm going to show you all here momentarily with the demo I'm going to do. But just because you do a vulnerability scan on a system and it doesn't find, it doesn't find one of these vulnerabilities, doesn't mean that the systems aren't vulnerable. It just means that, hey, that person could be sitting in there and they could maybe deploy like a password scraper on that machine. And that person logs in, or I'm sorry, keylogger, and they type something in. Next thing you know, you have credentials to move further into the network. I've got a question out here. How important is it to secure printers? Printers themselves, like I often have this discussion with people and the print spooler service, yes, because there's known exploits to it. But printers is kind of weird because I guess there is a scenario, a very real scenario where somebody could get in and they start attacking your printers. But think about that. Let's talk about that logical scenario thing. Um, uh, and when I talk about attacking printers, like they might be able to send, well, you could send a print job, regardless, as soon as you're on there, right? Maybe you want to flood that printer with a whole bunch of printouts saying, hey, you're hacked, or just gobbledygook and hoping that it's going to cause chaos, right? But on top of that, right, each printer has like a web server. They also have the SNMP access usually enabled. I honestly, I can't think of a scenario where I have found a printer and I went, hey, let me target that. That's going to be my golden ticket, right? Because um, normally they're just kind of left, they're plugged in, they have the defaults enabled. I personally have never seen or have never had an engagement where I was able to get into a printer and then use that printer as a jump point for other things. And the reason for that is, why would I be in the network, right? And then put all my focus on a printer? That doesn't make any sense, right? My focus is going to be on trying to get leverage where I'm already at to exploit into the servers and where the important data is. So yeah, printers, if all else fails for an attacker, maybe they have an avenue of attack there. Potentially, maybe they could say, oh, hey, well, I'm going to take over this printer and upload my own custom tools in it. But again, that doesn't really make any sense. It's not logical, right? Because uh, you if you're getting to a printer as an attacker, you already have some level of access in the system. So that attacker's focus isn't going to be a printer, it's going to be to elevate. What if it's a printer in the card data network? Yeah, again, I mean, potentially, could I rewrite like the printer firmware, uh, with enough knowledge? Again, potentially, and then you'd reboot it. But then there's also, you know, again, it's important for you to make sure that that printer network in the cardholder data network is secure, just so that maybe I can't intercept some sort of print job to it. But again, that's like a very highly unlikely scenario. So while it's important, like I would say, when you deploy a printer, just turn off things like SNMP, turn off the web server, all that other stuff, and it's basically stop the attacker in their tracks, right? And it's not even going to be an option. So while it's important to secure printers, I don't really believe them. And if anybody wants to have an offline discussion about it, I don't really believe them to be a high priority item, especially when you're looking at, oh, well, it has TLS 1.0 enabled. Like, who cares? Seriously, who cares if a printer has TLS 1.0 enabled? The conditions to exist would mean that attacker would have to be sitting on your network in between the printer communication and some other client sending data enough to gather enough data to do anything with. And there's potential that they don't even get useful data. So what could happen, again, the more realistic scenario is that attacker is going to look for admin level privileges to break into your CDE and get at where the actual card data is stored, in my personal opinion. So, I mean, if they go after your printers, they could be just sitting there accomplishing nothing for a long time and then eventually get caught. They want to get in, get your data, deploy ransomware, get out. That's what they're looking to do. All right. So yeah, again, that's a good question, because I find myself having that argument with people a lot. It's like, the auditors, right? They want that check mark. Oh, your printers are nice and secure. It's like, but realistically speaking, it's not a valid target. So again, my recommendation with printers would turn off SNMP and turn off their web services if possible, and just make sure if the web services are enabled, just have that change that default password before you deploy it on the network, and you're golden. All right. Are there any other questions before I move on to hopefully the cool demo that's going to work awesome for me? Because these live demos are always a little shaky. All right, cool. So I'm going to move on. I'm going to show everybody a demo of this Cobalt Strike program. So Cobalt Strike, if you look it up, it's a red team tool, right? Say right here. A lot of people actually find older versions of stolen Cobalt Strike out there in the wild where it's been cracked. And there are these groups because it's just a cool framework. It's really simple to use. There's tons of community scripts geared towards it. And it's really powerful, and it has a lot of flexibility in joining, a lot of flexibility, like as far as what it can do, right? So I'm going to demo like a real simple, small sample of it and kind of show everybody what could happen when somebody opens up a bad email, downloads a program, and next thing you know, a little misconfiguration issue on that part leads to the breach of a domain controller. All right, and the deployment of ransomware. So that'll be fun too. All right, so give me a second here while I queue all that up. Oh no, my session expired. All right, I'm going to kind of explain to everybody what I got going on here. What this is SkyTap. This is a virtual cloud platform. It's pretty cool because it allows me to do demos of things. Whoops, get out of there. All right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin up Kali on Cobalt Strike on a Kali virtual machine. Now, Kali is a penetration testing tool. And in this scenario, granted, I'm trying to replicate what would really happen. This is all internal, but this is I could have done this with external IPs and all this other stuff. It would have just cost me more money. And I don't want to do that because it's basically ended up being the same result. So I'm going to log into my Kali machine here. And the next thing I'm going to do is I have Cobalt Strike kind of pre-installed here. I am going to go ahead and go into the Cobalt Strike program and kick it off. And again, I'm doing this exactly how I would do it if I were an attacker in your system. So you can see from kind of start to finish. Okay. So I now have what I'm doing next is I'm starting up something called the team server. Okay. And the team server is just that. It's the command and control aspect. It's the control server for Cobalt Strike. So the idea behind it is you can spin up a control server anywhere in the world, right? And you'd have multiple people connect to it, right? Through a client, through the Cobalt Strike client. So first step of this process is actually spinning up the team server. And then the next process after that would be to spin up the Cobalt Strike client. Now, I'm running it all from the same machine. Typically, that's not what you do. Typically, is you spin up the team server on one machine, and then you connect to the client from another machine, just for the sake of keeping it simple and cost savings. I'm spinning it all up from one machine here. So here we go. I'm now going to go in and launch the Cobalt Strike client. You know what? And the funny thing is, I'm doing a lot of up arrow there. Normally, if I just type it in, it saves me time, but I just like to do the up arrow. So anybody else ever do that? Like you up arrow to find the last command, you go through like 20 or 30 history commands until you find the one, and in reality is you could have just started it right there. I do it all the time. But here we go. We're kicking off the Cobalt Strike client. And we're going to have this kind of little interface that says, hey, go ahead and connect into the server. And again, this is so the Cobalt Strike server, the control server, I'm now connecting in with the client, and it's going to give me the interface for Cobalt Strike. So here we go. And boom, and that's it. It's nothing too crazy looking. I mean, it gets a little crazy when you start breaking into things. But I also already have some kind of things staged here. I have that already kind of set up. I have a clone of a website set up and running, and I have something called a listener, right? So the server has, it's listening on a certain port, and what it's listening for is a connection from a client. So when they download the program, I trick them into downloading a program, that connection comes back, talks to my server, and depending on the permissions and the way it's set up and the exploit made, I then have access to that client machine, right? So I'm going to demo that for you now, but in the very simplest form, this is what we have going on right here. Nothing too flashy. It starts looking a little bit cooler, but it has a really cool interface where you can do lots of things. So let's move on to our Windows 10 machine. Typical Windows 10 setup here. And again, obviously this is staged, but there's other things that happen that can cause, this type of scenario. It's a very realistic scenario. It happens all the time. This type of thing to happen, right? So here we go. I'm going to log in. We mentioned Sally earlier. Sally got hacked, and I'm just going to log in as Sally. All right, so here we go, typical Windows 10 end user. And so Sally works for, and this scenario is something I set up for, hopefully they don't mind me using their name again. This is a scenario where I set up a demo for Cape Cod Community College, simulate an attack on their network. So, I had just kind of talk to them about it and work through it, and I'm just kind of recycling it. So hopefully they don't mind. I don't think they will, but hey, if anybody from Cape Cod EDU is on, I apologize. Come yell at me later about it. Nothing too bad though. So I'm going to go ahead and open up this email, right? And this is kind of how the email works, right? This one's a little bit different. What we see is usually a macro enabled one. I didn't feel like installing the Office suite on this machine, so I went with something different. But we usually have something like, hey, hi Sally, hey, see this latest update to your budget. Oh, forgot to tell you, it's macros enabled, so you'll have to go in and click here, here, and here to get it to run. And people do it all the time. So very similar type of scenario, except this one I'm saying, hey, Sally, please visit the website, and you're like, oh, hey, I work for capecod.edu. So yeah, I'll click on this. This is believable. I'm going to click here. And then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, it's doing exactly what it told me to do. And this is a clone of the Cape Cod Community College website that I did right from Cobalt Strike. I just told Cobalt Strike, and I said, hey, go clone this website. Boom, 30 seconds. I had a full clone of the website, right, hosted on that team server. So we're looking here. I mean, it looks like a pretty legitimate website to me. The only thing showing that it's not legitimate is basically right here. And there are scenarios where people don't even really look at that. They're like, oh, hey, yeah, this is us. So I'm going to go ahead and keep this backup exe, because that's what the IT people were telling me to do. And Sally's a little bit of an advanced user. They actually ended up giving her local admin privileges, so because she updates QuickBooks, and they got sick of her asking for updates to QuickBooks. She's like a finance person. Okay, so we go keep setting the scenario, and she's like, oh, okay, yeah, I know, I've done this before. I got to go ahead and run this program. And she goes ahead and she runs it. And next thing you know, she's like, oh, weird, I guess it's working. I don't really know, right? And that's it. And she doesn't really think anything else of it, goes about her day, right? Well, in the background here, we'll see that we have this little listener hookup, right? And what that's telling me is, hey, I now have full access under this user shacked to this machine, okay? So that's how that happens. That scenario is that client is now talking back to this command and control server that I own, and I have permissions as this user, right? Now, I did just mention, hey, Sally was given local admin rights because, hey, she has to do updates. She's a little bit of a power user, right? And the IT people there thought, oh, what's the big deal? Gave her local admin rights. Who cares, right? Well, I'll show you why that's a big deal here in 2 seconds. So the first thing I'm going to do now that I have my connection, it's listening every 1 minute. I'm going to send it the sleep 0 command, so it interacts with me quicker. And hopefully I get it under. Okay, sweet. I think I got it. Maybe I didn't. So what that command did is basically it's gonna do a random callback to me. Previously, it was doing every minute, which is kind of painstaking. But this can also be used as a God, what's the word I'm looking for here, people? It's used to evade detection, right? So if I say, hey, machine, call back to me every 20, 30 minutes, and it's making that call every 20, 30 minutes, that's probably not going to be picked up as the firewall log as a persistent connection. So I send the sleep 0 command to make it a little bit faster for the demo purposes. But so I got to wait another couple of seconds. But while we're doing that, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and run a program called Mimikatz. Now, Mimikatz is a really well-known program. Microsoft put in a great protection to it, but Mimikatz can also bypass that protection. But since she's a local administrator on this machine, it gives me that elevated right to run Mimikatz even a little bit better. And what it's going to do is it's going to read all the credentials stored in memory on this machine. or credentials running as a service. Now, again, somebody else on the net IT team decided that they need to run a service as the domain administrator account, and we're going to see the damage that does here in 1 second. So I'm going to go ahead and execute this program, and it's going to call home to me, and it just gave me a whole list of accounts that are stored in memory on that machine. Now, slowly here, I'm going to go ahead and browse up. Now, keep in mind, right, we talked about authenticated, right? So I'm able to, this all started with an authenticated session. If I had just dropped my pen test box in here and I'm working on this, this whole program becomes invalid. That's why it's important to kind of mimic what an attacker could do in real life. And this is what's going on. Now, the next thing I'd like to call note of, I haven't actually exploited any vulnerability here. These are all just, there's been no exploited vulnerability. One is a misconfiguration I'm taking advantage of. She was given, local administrator rights on her machine. Again, somebody thought that wasn't a big deal because, oh, hey, it's not a big deal. It's not like we're giving it to her on a server. And two, the administrator somewhere runs a service as a domain admin account. And there's tons of machines out there that run services as domain admins, which is very, very, very bad. Okay, and I'll show you why that's bad, because it's then getting passed in memory. So I'm going to kind of scroll up here. And I'm scrolling slow because I'm looking for that right there. So I can see here I have username administrator. The domain is hack.local, which is this domain, and the password is hack number 12. Now, that's not a super bad password, a super great password to begin with, so we probably could have gotten that anyway with some regular user spraying. But now that I know that, I'm like, that's game over, right? I don't know what other machine I have in the network, so I'm going to run a quick port scan. Whoops. To see what other machines I have out here. And then from there, it's returning a list of things. And I'm going to see other targets I can interact with. Oh, and hey, look at that. Windows Server 2012 standard. Now, knowing that this machine is out here, I'm going to attempt to compromise this. And I'm going to use these. Whoops. Oh, God, what happened? Let me go ahead and kick that off again. Sorry. I'm going to use, hey, my administrator account that I just grabbed. I'm going to then tell it to come back and talk to my control server, which is, the Cobalt Strike control server. And I'm going to daisy chain it through Sally. So again, I'm now moving laterally, right? I'm finding other targets to go to. And with any luck, if this all works out, I'm going to launch. I should have another little thing pop up here. That's going to give me connection to that Windows Server 2012, which is also in the scenario domain controller. So just give me a second here. I see it go dark on me. And then when it comes back online, I should have 2 connections there. So again, just to reiterate, I found this machine on the network. I used administrator credentials to go ahead and call home. And now, as you can see, I just had this new system pop in, and I'm in as system, right? Instead of domain admin. And system has the full administrator privileges over the machine. Now, there is some kind of issue with Cobalt Strike where for some reason, oh, holy crap. I was going to say, normally it freezes up on me and I have to launch the client, but hey, this is cool. It didn't do it this time. Awesome, making progress. So now that I have access to this domain controller, it's game over. I can pull any sorts of users. I can make myself users. I could also check out what's on the server, right, itself. So I'm going to do that now. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and issue that kind of same command here. Oh, it did it on me, guys. It froze on me. All right, let me go ahead and close it out. And this kind of also highlights the coolness of the team server anyway. Is that basically I could just relaunch my client and have my connection right back in there again. So that's the cool part of the Cobalt Strike program. I'm just going to relaunch. I'll have a nice fresh connection. And again, I'm still up and running as I was before. And so now I'm going to just go ahead and interact with this machine a little bit quicker, issuing that sleep 0. So again, the idea behind that is going to talk back to me more frequently. I'm now going to go ahead and browse, interact with the system a little bit more. Launching the file browser. And in the next, 10 seconds or so, it should give me a directory listing of all the files on the C drive, right? And from there, I'm going to do a little ransomware upload, my own flavor of ransomware. And there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and upload my ransomware on there. Where am I? Where's my ransomware? There it is. It's called Jessieware. All right. So I'm going to open that up. Ooh, I uploaded it in the wrong spot. That's okay. I'm going to just go re-upload it to the root of C here. Sorry. Jessieware. Okay, so as you can see, my ransomware is now on this system. And again, I haven't logged into this machine, even though I could. I know the domain admin username and password. I found it all. The idea is like this is all kind of happening in the background, but for illustration purposes, I'm now going to just bounce over to that machine, right? And normally, the attacker doesn't have this level of RDP access. I just happen to do because it's a demo, right? So I'm going to log in as my hacked administrator. Oh, they forgot to change their password. That was unexpected. Hold on. It doesn't matter though, because I already have my session, right? Windows doesn't invalidate that session for a while. So log back in. Okay, so to highlight, again, I used that initial access point. I then scraped passwords. I was able to do so. Sally was a local admin on her box. Boom, from there, I got the domain admin account. I then created another reverse shell just in case I lose my connection to Sally. I still have a connection to this server. And now I'm going to just show that, hey, my ransomware has been uploaded right there. I'm going to go ahead and execute that from Cobalt Strike. And let's take a look at a couple of things that we have here. We got some very important files here. We've got some credit cards. I'll answer your questions. Thank you in a minute here. Credit card numbers. That's my coworkers, Pete and Jeff there. That's a little cute girl horse that we got. And that was MGM and a PDF. I don't have a PDF. But so the way ransomware works is once it's deployed, it's going to go ahead and encrypt those files. I'm sure everybody knows what ransomware is, but I'm going to show you what it looks like as it's happening live. And it happens so quick, it happens in the blink of an eye. So what I'm going to do is, again, now an attacker, normally they would identify data like this and they would grab it and they rip it up to the dark web or to like a mega file upload. They grab all your important data, and then on their way out, this is what they're doing, right? They're going to go ahead and they're going to go, hey, and usually it's in one attack package. Usually they have it geared up. So it's like upload, deploy ransomware, right? But here we go. I'm going to go ahead and right click. I'm going to now execute my ransomware in that target system, which again is that server. And boom. So now that we have that, just gotta keep an eye out. I forget how long it takes for it to actually go through, but you're going to see the file name extension change because that's what happens. And I'll be honest, there's an error in my code somewhere. It usually pops up like a picture of me. And for some reason, I can't get that to execute when I'm running it remotely. So once we see the file name change over, I'll go ahead and double click on my ransomware just to show everybody my stupid face pop up. But again, right now, it should be masked. I have it masked as firefox.exe running in the background. Let's see if it actually executed. I'll have to see if Firefox is running. Yeah, see that where it says Firefox? That's not Firefox. There's no Firefox on this system. It's actually the ransomware running, looking for files to encrypt. And again, waiting is the hardest part here. But within seconds, we're going to go ahead and see these file name extensions change over. So to answer that question that was posed here, how do you mentor new cybersecurity professionals to understand applying the assumed breach model? That's a great question. I think starting with attending sessions like these is a great idea. Or actually just even start researching like, hey, why should I be doing vulnerability scanning using authenticated credentials? Because like you're going to find way more vulnerabilities. You're going to dig deeper into that software, right? That the software level vulnerabilities are only authenticated. You're going to find way more avenues of attack, more attack surface. It's going to make your attack surface a lot bigger. So start reading, attending more sessions like these, reading up on it more, going, okay, well, what's the difference when you start talking to these pen testing companies? Go, hey, what do you do? And if they go, oh, well, we just do a vulnerability scan and we try to exploit. That's not what you should be doing. You should be doing stuff like this. Oh, look at that. See, we see that the extensions changed. And now I can't interact with these anymore. And some of you might be going, oh, it's just an extension rename. It's not. It's actually an encrypted file now. So even if I were to change the extension back, it still messes up that file. Okay. Let me go ahead and just so we get my stupid face, and when I get a minute, I'll try to fix my code. But as I'm talking here, well, you should see my stupid face pop up, even though you guys are already seeing it here. I'm gonna just expand this out a little bit, but that's it. So that's like, again, summarize, authentic. Oh, there we go. Stupid Jesse. All right. I don't like that picture. So it just basically tells you got to hit ransomware. You should be more careful. I can't even close it out. And this was, again, the demo I did with Cape Cod EDU. So hopefully they don't mind me reusing it. And it's only a month or two old. So anyway, that's it. So again, authenticated user, boom, gets compromised. Oh, little misconfiguration, boom, leads to admin access. Oh, now that they have admin access, deployment of ransomware, stealing of data, domain controller, game over. And again, that all happened within, I don't know, when did I do that? In 10 minutes? And I'm just one person, very realistic scenario. Granted, it was designed to work, but it happens all the time. And that's all I have. I don't know how long we were supposed to go. I don't know what time. It's 1:59. I guess I've been talking for an hour. Absolutely. People don't want to know that they're not wearing any clothes, right? So I've always encountered skepticism about the way I recommended doing things. People always want to kind of fight back and go, but what if? And my return is, yeah, what if this though, right? So, or like, oh, we don't really see the value in that. Well, you got to see the value if you get hit with ransomware, and then you're going to come back and be like, man, why didn't we test against this? Why didn't we do a little more prep? Why didn't we find, try to find these vulnerabilities earlier, right? And it's not easy. Not a lot of places can do this level of testing. Not a lot of places even kind of think about this. And I'm just trying to raise awareness for like, hey, no, let's think about the realistic scenario, right? Is it realistic that somebody opens up an email that leads to their machine getting compromised, that leads to the whole organization compromised? And the answer is yes, because it's happening all the time. And that's how these people are getting in with ransomware, advanced persistent threats, or they're getting credentials off the dark web and they're using VPN access and all this other stuff. So that is it. I hope everybody enjoyed that. If you did enjoy it, please give us some great feedback. Let ISACA know. I think we're at the end. I don't know, Nick, is that good? Are we good?
Yes, we are.
Right.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Great. I can now. Don't keep me talking because I'm running out of steam.
No, sorry about that. So I'm going to give everyone about one more minute here to ask any questions. And this is your last opportunity as well, if you're here for the CPE credit, to set your Zoom name as your first and last name. Once the session ends, it's going to take whatever names I have in there. And that's basically the list that I give to ISACA New England. So that will be what they cross-reference with their registration list when giving out the CPE credits. As I mentioned, today's session is recorded and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Compass IT Compliance, all one word. If you have any further questions for Jesse or for anybody on our team about IT security and compliance, feel free to reach out to us at compassitc.com/contact, and we'd be happy to answer those questions. And I do see a couple thank you, great sessions coming in here, Jesse. Here's another question for you. Actually, I'll forward it to you right now.
Sure.
And I see another question here regarding, are we able to rewatch? Yes, this will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. It will likely be uploaded early next week, Monday or Tuesday. So stay tuned for that. We'll post it out on our social media as well when it is uploaded. I just forwarded the question over to you, Jesse.
Yeah, the question there, the presentation has Patel as being relevant to how usable is malware red team engagement. This exactly what I showed you is essentially a red team engagement. A little of the conditions were favorable to me, but this is what a red team's going to do. They're going to try to come at you with whatever they have, email, phish, try to break into your facility. But yeah, so a red team engagement is a good red team engagement should try known user credentials, getting them out on the dark web, or even being provided them beforehand.